Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Daniel Part 2 in our continuing study of Old Testament literature and theology. We're coming this time to Daniel chapter 9. Now, I know last time we raced through the entire book of Daniel, but we skipped over this chapter and we did it intentionally with the idea of coming back. What I was doing is looking at all the times where a prophecy could be seen of Antiochus the Fourth, and I gave you that whole story. Now we're going to see another passage. Does it refer to Antiochus or does it refer to something else or maybe a little bit of both? Let's look at it. Daniel 9, chapter 1, chapter 9 and verse 1. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of Median descent, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans. Now, this sounds like this was maybe someone of the Persians. There was a Darius the Great, but I'm not sure that that is him. We're not entirely sure who this Darius is. Is it a early governor of Babylon under Cyrus? That sounds most likely, although some have suggested that Darius the Mede was another name for Cyrus. I'm not so sure either way. We continue, verse 2. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books the number of years which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah. So Jeremiah had given a prophecy. We looked at that, a prophecy of 70 years. The Babylonian captivity would be for 70 years. And we noticed that that was from the destruction of the temple to the rebuilt temple. But Daniel doesn't necessarily know that. And so notice to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. He's read that much. Verse 3. So I gave my attention to the Lord God to seek him by prayer and supplications with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. He begins to pray about the return. Has the Babylonian captivity been completed yet? After all, he's been here by this time for 70 years, well, or pretty close to it. We're coming to the point finally where it's been 70 years since that first group, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, some of the nobility, had been taken, 605 BC. We count forward. Now the Babylonian Empire has fallen. The Persians have taken over. I have either a new governor on the scene or Cyrus with a different name, one of the two. Verse 4, I prayed to the Lord my God and confessed and said, Alas, O Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant and loving kindness for those who love him and keep his commandments, we have sinned. Now, I'm not sure that Daniel has done any of these things, but he is confessing the sin of the nation of Israel. There really is no nation of Israel, but there's the people of Israel, and most of them are here in Mesopotamia now, either in Babylon or in other places to which they've been brought in those three deportations. He's confessing their sins. He's not a priest, but he's acting as though he were a priest. He's confessing the sins of the nation on behalf of the nation because Jeremiah had said, you can come back if you repent. And so, just in case, he's going to repent on behalf of all the people, all the dispossessed, all the exiles. Verse 5, we have sinned, committed iniquity, acted wickedly, and rebelled, even turning aside from your commandments and ordinances, which they had done, even if Daniel himself hasn't necessarily done that. Verse 6, moreover, we have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, our fathers, and all the people of the land. So this is a prayer of confession. We jump now down to verse 20. Now, while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God in behalf of the holy mountain of my God, while I was still speaking in prayer, then the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. That'd be around, we say roughly around 3 in the afternoon, as the sun is beginning to go down toward the horizon. Verse 24, and here's what he says, 70 weeks have been decreed. Now, he's been asking about 70 years, but here we see not 70 years, but 70 weeks, Shavuim, Shavim, 70 sevens. And of course, a 7 usually makes up a week. But I think there's more to it than just 70 weeks, like a year and a half. I think that what we have here is something describing 77s of periods of time, of years. And most interpreters are going to take it as such, that he's not talking about something that's going to happen a year and a half later. Not 70 literal weeks, but 77s, 70 years have been decreed for your people. Now remember, Daniel's been asking 70 years, and are we there yet? And what he's hearing is, no, what's 70 times 7? That'd be 490, not a 70-year captivity, but a 490-year period until the exile will truly be over. Do you catch what's happening here? It reminds me a little bit of that time. Now, they're not the same, but still, I can't help but remember that time when Peter asked Jesus, how many times should I forgive my brother when he sins after, should I forgive him 7 times and or maybe even 70 times? And Jesus says, how about 70 times 7? In other words, a whole lot of times. And that's the sort of thing that we have here. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish their transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Now, the most holy place, that's the temple. If we're talking about the literal temple. If we're not, it's still a temple. The most holy place, the very holy place. Remember how we call it the Holy of Holies, which means the most holy place. This is temple language, whether we are to take it literally or not. And on first impulse, Daniel would have thought, well, that sounds pretty literal to me. That's what he was asking about. When are we going to go back home? Are we there yet? And so we have, notice, my translation says the most holy place, but the Hebrew, Kodesh, Kodeshim, holy of holies, the very holy place, right? And that's always describing the temple. But notice there's not any definite article in the Hebrew, so to anoint holy of holies, but it's not the holy of holies, so that again leaves it a little bit up in the air. Now, this idea of 77s, and what it is doing, the terminus quo, is to finish the transgression, 6 things. Secondly, to make an end of sin. Thirdly, to make atonement for iniquity. To bring in everlasting righteousness. To seal up vision and prophecy. To anoint the most holy place. Are we talking temples, or are we talking this is what Jesus did upon the cross? Certainly the first number of these, we would look at Jesus just without even blinking to finish their transgression. That's what he does, to make an end of sin. That's what he came to do, to make atonement for iniquity. That was the cross. To bring in everlasting righteousness, that's the cross. To seal up vision and prophecy, I think that sounds a bit like the cross as well. All the prophets had pointed to Jesus. Once he came, it's sealed. Now, I'm not saying there's not a second coming after that, but that hasn't been revealed to Daniel yet. And to anoint the most holy place, think about what Jesus said as he stood in the temple in John chapter 2, verse 19. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. He was standing in the literal temple, but John, the gospel writer, adds, lest we miss the point, but he was speaking of the temple of his body. So you can see where this might be going. Now we continue into verse 25. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. So a decree is given. Of course, there's a number of decrees, so we have to be careful here. Until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Now that's interesting that it describes it as 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The English Standard Version changes that a bit. It says, from the going out of the word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again. Notice it separates it. It's already separated in the sense that it gives 7 weeks and 62 weeks. But here in the English Standard Version, it wants to say 7 weeks, but that has nothing to do with it's for 62 weeks it shall be built. What's going on here? However, let me say the then for is added by the translators. That's not in the Hebrew text. So I think that maybe in this case, sometimes literal can be overly literal, but I think in this case, the New American Standard has not done us an injustice, but I think maybe they are a bit more on target. Now, verse 26, then after the 62 weeks, doesn't say after the 7 weeks and 62 weeks, just after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. Now, if I think of a Messiah that was cut off, I can actually think of two different applications of this prophecy, and we'll come to them. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city. Now, when we look at the decrees that have gone forth, Cyrus the Great had a decree. It's in Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, that in 539 BC, the Jews were allowed to go back and rebuild the temple. They didn't immediately go back, but they went shortly after under Zerubbabel. A second decree goes out under Darius, 520 BC, where the Jews are allowed to complete their temple. A third decree in the days of Artaxerxes brings Ezra back in with still another return. That's quite a few years later. That's like close to 150 years later, or more than that, actually. And then Artaxerxes again gives a second decree, 445 BC. This is the one that allowed Nehemiah to go back and rebuild the walls. Now, if we add the 483 years, that is short of the last 7 years, that is the sum total of that, instead of 490, the 400, not the 70 weeks, but the 69 weeks. And this is adding the 7 and the 62. So should we do that or not? I'm not sure, but if we do that, we go from Cyrus, just counting that out as years, we go to 56 BC, and let me say, nothing happened in 56 BC, and not with regarding the temple or anything like that. We go to the decree of Darius. He's the one who said, rebuild the temple. Artaxerxes would be 457 BC, and then Artaxerxes, his date would be 445 BC. In the case of Darius, at 37 BC, the only thing I can think of significant there is that Herod the Great arrived back after he had been driven out. He arrives back and retakes Israel, but I don't know how that possibly relates to this prophecy. And so I don't see any connection, and I don't know anyone else that has seen any connection. In the case of Artaxerxes, 457, where he makes the decree, I go the requisite number of years forward, and I get to 27 AD, which is around the time that the ministry of Jesus begins. That actually works if I'm looking to see Jesus in this prophecy. And then Artaxerxes' final decree that allowed Nehemiah to go back and rebuild the walls, that's 39 AD. Nothing takes place there. So that doesn't really seem to fit either. Now, there has been an attempt by a Sir Robert Anderson to say, well, we're not supposed to use real years. We're supposed to use sort of what he calls prophetic years of 400 and not 365 and a half days or and a quarter days, but rather 360 days. And then that would shave it down where that final decree of Artaxerxes with Nehemiah, that would bring it more closer to 30, or I forget if it's 30 or 33 AD. But you have to play with the years, and I'm not sure that we ought to be playing with the years to make them shorter years. I don't see that something that's really specified anywhere in the Bible. Now, if we take this, and this is, we're looking at different interpretations now. I refer to this as the Maccabean interpretation. We looked last time at how the high priest had met with a quote-unquote accident at the hands of Antiochus IV. If we look at the first fall of Jerusalem, 605 BC, and we go those 62 weeks or 434 years, I know that's sort of hard to follow, that's why I've written it out. We come to 171 BC, which was about the time when that high priest was murdered. But then notice you had 7 weeks mentioned. We don't see that contiguous. We don't see that as as a straight line, but rather a separate period from 586 BC, where the temple was destroyed, to 537 BC, where permission was given, and they begin to actually go back. Permission was actually given a couple of years earlier, but now they begin to go back and do the work, and perhaps it's about that time that they're finally getting back and starting that work. Does that fit? Should I be separating the 7 weeks from the 62 weeks? Well, first of all, we actually have a separation in the way they're described. And then notice I go forward from that, the murder of the high priest. But then in the middle of the 70th week, if I go 3.5 years after that murder, I have the temple being desecrated by Antiochus IV. So that would sort of work. And I don't think we ought to throw this out. I think maybe I'm supposed to see something here, that there is a prophecy that connects with Antiochus in the same way that all of the other prophecies so far in chapter 11 and chapter 8, and I think maybe even in chapter 7, have connected with Antiochus. I'm not saying that's the sum total of it, but that's part of the bigger picture. The next view I want to talk about is the dispensational interpretation. Let me confess, I'm not a dispensationalist, although I graduated many years ago from a dispensational Bible college. It's a system of eschatology that I was taught very early on. And sometimes I kid that it took me 6 years to get through Bible college, and then another 6 years to get over it. And after that period, I actually rejected that view of dispensationalism. Remember how Sir Robert Anderson, I mentioned, adapted that period. So instead of 483 years, he makes it a bit less because it's years of 360 days. And he works that out to try to make it from the order to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem in the days of Nehemiah, 444 BC, down to the crucifixion of Christ. And he manages to get very close in the neighborhood. In fact, he would say to the exact day. I'm not sure that it does. I haven't done the math, but that's his. And then you say, well, where's the 70th week? Well, his view, the dispensational view, is that the prophecy stops there, and you have a parenthesis, and it doesn't pick up until a future coming of Jesus. And we talked about this last week, the dispensational view that says there's not just Jesus is going to return, but he's going to return twice. One would be in what they like to call the rapture, and the other would be the second coming of Christ. Because to say the second and third coming of Christ just doesn't sound very good. And then the 70th week picks up then again after that, and so that's all reserved for the future. So everything we've seen in this prophecy about the prince who is to come and things like that, that's all reserved for someone in the future, a future antichrist who comes and does some bad things, after which Jesus returns. And so we saw that layout in last time's class. This is a dispensational interpretation of Daniel chapter 9. Thirdly, I'd like to point to the historical interpretation. In this case, there are no gaps. You don't take the years and have to try to put a gap in there. Instead, we go from the first order to rebuild the walls, which would have been Ezra going back there. There is a reference where he seems to have been given permission on this. It doesn't come out in the decree; it comes out in his prayer. And so from 457 BC, 69 weeks, 483 years, down to it's right around the time of the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. We already pointed that out. And then 7 years into that, well, half of 7 years, about 3.5 years. And a lot of folk think that the ministry of Jesus was about 3.5 years. It may have been. I'm not going to say conclusively that's what it was. It was at least 2.5 years just when I count the Passovers in the Gospel of John. And then John mentions another feast, which may or may not have been a Passover. I don't want to say, again, dogmatically. But it puts us at least in the neighborhood, so that in the neighborhood of halfway through that week, you have the death, burial, and resurrection and ascension of Jesus. And then within 40 years of that, you have Jerusalem destroyed. It's not immediately, but it doesn't say immediately. But you have Jerusalem destroyed. And so we don't have to change the years or anything. That actually works nicely to make the passage point to Jesus. Is it supposed to point to Jesus? That's the question. Should we accept the Jewish Maccabean interpretation, or should we accept the historical interpretation here that points to Jesus? I can't help but wonder if it does both. It reminds me a little bit of my daughter when she was very young, and she's nowhere near young these days. But back when she was young, they had these things called hologram cards. And you would take a card and it would have a picture of something, maybe a superhero or a baseball player, I'm not sure. Um, but it would have a card of an image of something. But if you turn the card just a little bit, you didn't have to flip it all the way over, just turn it a little bit, the image would actually change. And I can't help but wonder if the same thing doesn't happen here, that there was an immediate fulfillment, not immediate to Daniel's day, quite a few hundred years later, but still an early fulfillment after Daniel's day that did point to Antiochus and to the cleansing of the temple and the death of the high priest, all those things that were referenced, and then again would take place pointing to Jesus, after which the temple again would have an outside invader come and the temple would be destroyed. Is it possible to see both of these? Let's continue reading chapter 9, verse 26. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off. We already saw this, and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come. So you notice you've got the Messiah cut off. That sounds a lot like Jesus, although it also sounds like that high priest that was murdered, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city. Now, here's the question. When we have Messiah the prince back in chapter 9, verse 25, and again, here the Messiah is mentioned, although the title prince it doesn't go with him this time. And then the people of the prince who is to come, here's the question. Is that the same person? Is Messiah the same, Messiah the prince, the same prince as the people of the prince who is to come? Or are they different? And both the messianic, both the Maccabean view, as well as the historic view that just sees this as Jesus, both of those would agree, well, no, those are not the same people. You have the anointed one, high priest, and you have the anointed one, Jesus, but the one who comes that's going to destroy the city and the sanctuary, that's not the high priest and that's not Jesus. That's someone else. Now, let me also say there is a view that wants to say, no, they're all the same. And they want to point to Jesus and they want to say, well, Jesus destroyed the temple in AD 70, and that was either his coming or it was a coming of Jesus. That position is known, depending on if they say it's the coming, that position is known as preterism. And full preterism says that Jesus returned in 70 AD to destroy the temple. And that's all that's the only second coming there's ever going to be. There is no second coming except what happened in the year 70 AD. Let me say for the record, I'm not a preterist. If you're interested, I will put up, I'll be able to give you a whole series of reasons why I'm not a preterist. I've written a paper on it. I'm also not a partial preterist. Partial preterism says that wasn't the future second coming of Jesus, but it was a coming. And I don't even say that. Um, and both of those views would look at this being the same person. I'm not sure that I see that. But let's continue reading. Notice, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. Well, we can see where Antiochus did this. I'm not sure. We can see where the Romans came and put a stop to sacrifice. We can see where Jesus came, and in a sense, he didn't stop the sacrifices, but he actually gave himself as the better sacrifice. Let's continue reading. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate. Now notice the abominations and one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So notice that making desolate is actually repeated for emphasis. Now, where is then this abomination that makes desolate. Well, it's interesting. We already saw that wording in Daniel chapter 11 that talked about the coming of Antiochus IV. In a sense, he set up the abomination that makes desolate. But when we get to the New Testament, we have Jesus who uses these identical terms. This is Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 15. Jesus speaking on the Mount of Olives, where he's overlooking Jerusalem, and he's been in Jerusalem earlier that day. He says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, and just in case you didn't put it together with Daniel, he says, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet. Okay, so he's citing the passage we just read. When you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, and notice the next phrase, let the reader understand. I don't think Jesus said that. I think that's something Matthew added. Mark does the same thing. I think this is something Matthew adds because he knows when you read this, you're supposed to be thinking, wait a minute, that happened with Antiochus the fourth back in the like 100, 200 years ago. What Jesus are you talking about? And Matthew's saying, I know this is tough. I know this sounds strange, but it's going to happen again. And so he says, when you see that which was spoken of by Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Verse 16, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. And so he describes, yes, you saw those things take place in the past. Yes, there was an abomination in the temple in the past, back in the days of Antiochus IV. Jesus says, but it's going to happen again. And it did. You say, when did it happen? Well, here's the testimony of Josephus, an eyewitness to the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, where he says the entire nation was now shut up by fate as in a prison. This is once the Romans surrounded the city. And the Roman army encompassed the city when it was crowded with inhabitants. Accordingly, the multitude of those that therein perished exceeded all the destructions that either men or God ever brought upon the world. It almost sounds like he's quoting Matthew chapter 24. He's not. I don't think he's ever read Matthew 24. He's describing the fall of Jerusalem. Now, he doesn't say Jesus came and destroyed it. He says the Romans came and destroyed it. And they did. And the first thing they did once they had destroyed it, they burnt the temple to the ground, and then they built a pagan altar and offered pagan sacrifices, making it an abomination of desolation. So we look at the temple back in the days of Antiochus, and we've seen how this prophecy points out this Seleucid king that would come on the scene, who murdered the high priest and desecrated the temple. And the Maccabeans eventually won their liberty and cleansed the temple, and all was good. But then we see Jesus saying it's going to happen again. And it did in the days of Titus, the Roman general, who came and in the year 70 AD surrounded the city. This Roman general came a generation after Jesus had been crucified, dead, buried, ascended into heaven, and he destroyed the temple. And Christians were told escaped. Why? Because they heeded the words of Jesus, the warning of Jesus, who said, when you see this, get out of town. And they did. Eusebius, an early church historian, talks about how the Christians saw the Romans coming. They packed up, remembering the words of Jesus. They got out of town, and they saw this as a fulfillment of the words of Jesus and the prophecy that's given in Daniel. So we look at it and we see Jesus, the one who finished the sacrifices, who completed that which had to be done, who in a sense he didn't destroy the temple, but he put away those things where the temple doesn't need to be rebuilt. He is the ultimate sacrifice. And when its time was come, the temple was destroyed, but Jesus and his sacrifice remains for us forever.